Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Flourishing Forties podcast, where we curate lots of insights from thought leaders, professionals in the space who are sharing with us how we can thrive in purpose, in profits, and productivity. I'm so excited about the topic we're having today because for many of you, it may sound like a taboo that you've not had the opportunity to listen to experts in the space. But I've got with me Melissa Macgowan, who is the founder of Meno Collective. She's passionate about menopause advocacy and support and aims to make menopause a superpower. I'm interested in that. She's also with her work exploring the diverse implications of menopause at work, empowering women and leaders and helping workplaces to thrive. Welcome, Melissa. How are you doing today?
I'm really great. And yeah, always excited to be talking on this topic because, it hasn't been talked about in open and safe ways. And there's a lot of myths and stigma and negativity. And that really hasn't worked for women, hasn't worked for their careers. And ultimately that doesn't work for workplaces either. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Absolutely. And it's like you said, it's a topic that is not common in workplaces, but it's something that is prevalent. It's happening more and more. And I'm hoping that our viewers and listeners will get more exposure through the insights that you will share. So let's get right into it. What is menopause for the sake of people who are hearing it for the first time?
Yeah, I guess to put it very simply, and it's not a simple process, but the first thing to understand is that it is a transition. And I know that you will have a lot of listeners who are familiar with change and transition and transformation. And, we know that isn't something that happens overnight, right? So menopause is a transition. It's a transition from a woman's reproductive years to her non-reproductive years. It's a biological change. It's a natural biological change. It's not about age. It's about hormone changes. However, one of the few average things we say about menopause is the average age of which a woman becomes, menopausal is around 51. But essentially the transition is made up of a series of stages. And what's great about opening conversations like these is younger women are starting to become more informed because I'll go through the stages, the pre-perimenopause stage is really starting to happen to women in their late 30s, and into their early 40s, and shifts are starting to happen. And they're not huge and they may not be really obvious, but they're what we call kind of those perimenopause years. And then we enter into the perimenopause years, and that's when the hormonal changes, the big hormones of, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, they fit together. Although many of us women have had numbers of issues along the ways, let's face it, with our hormones, it can be very challenging. But the jigsaw becomes more confused as hormones shift and generally go down. Again, it doesn't happen overnight. And for a lot of women, that perimenopause phase will start before they realise it has in fact begun. And so what we try and teach women is to tune in more to their body. And I know, and, many of your listeners might relate, when we're working in busy jobs and we've got a lot going on in our lives, we're not necessarily in environments where we're trained to be tuned into the flags that are coming up in our body to tell us, hey, there's some things going on here in relation to hormonal changes. So perimenopause really means about menopause, and it's the most symptomatic phase of that transition. It's the most challenging phase. It happens to women generally in their it could start in their early 40s, but mid 40s to late 40s. So here they are, often managing teams and budgets and making decisions, and they've got a lot going on in family and caring and community and all sorts of stuff, right? Financial, and then there's this sort of slow burn around the impact of hormone changes, and I can talk about symptoms in a minute. So that stage tends to last, on average 4 years. But for many, it's much longer. So it's common for that to be, a 10-year window of sort of going through these changes. And whilst your cycle becoming maybe irregular, shorter, heavier periods, these kinds of things. That could be one of the symptoms, if you like. It's not necessarily the first one. And it's not necessarily something that happens, early in the piece. So we need to learn more about some of the other ways that our body and mind are showing us that we are going through this transition. And then eventually, and it is kind of a good thing in many ways, your period stops, menstruation stops. And once that has been the case for 12 months and one day, you are technically menopausal. And menopause is that day. And from that day onwards, you are a postmenopausal person, right? And so for the rest of your life and your career and all that stuff, you are postmenopausal. So we really like to, have this conversation so that women who are in the thick of perimenopause feel some relief and they understand what's going on and they know they're not on their own and they're not going mad. And that the women who are yet to come into that phase understand a bit more so they know what they can do maybe to be more prepared, not scared, but a bit more prepared. And, they don't get sort of knocked sideways like I did, for example, and many other women do. So, yeah, it's a transition. And what do we know about transitions? They can be transformational and hugely empowering and life-changing. And they can also be deeply, deeply challenging. And I would say the menopause transition is no different.
Mm. And you're right. I've heard a lot of stories. And to be honest, we read a lot on the internet without, they come without filters. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes they're horrible. Sometimes you're wondering, what the heck? Why am I a woman? So there are so many stories in there. And I'm so happy that you're advocating for this. But tell us a bit, how did you get into this topic?
Yeah, so I was working as a human resources exec and leader myself, and I had four children. We have, and my youngest were probably only, they were twins. They were probably only around 2. When I now look back and can see that I was certainly in perimenopause, but because I was on the young side and I was in my early 40s then, 41, 42, it wasn't evident to the doctors what was going on. So there was a lot of rabbit holes that I was going down, but I was not feeling good. I was tired. I had, like things like hair loss. I started to have a lot of acne. I was anxious for the first time, and I hadn't really experienced that before. Then I would drop balls at work, and I would sort of forget stuff. And I remember calling my husband one day and saying, I really think I'm losing my mind. I've made the same mistake twice on a spreadsheet this week. I missed 3 meetings. This is not how I normally roll. I didn't have the energy to exercise. I was putting on weight. And then really it wasn't until the hot flushes started that I went back to the doctor. By then, I'd seen about 8 different doctors. I'd seen specialists, alternative therapists, and they were telling me, it's iron, it's thyroid, it's all these different things. It's gut health, it's stress, it's blah, blah. And it wasn't until, and so I was pleased about the hot flushes really because they were the one that was like, that's a much more common sign. And we're now going to go back and investigate again. And look, I was on the earlier side, but I speak to women every week who are in their mid-40s, who are deep in perimenopause and even potentially postmenopausal. So it is not as uncommon as we think. And, doctors are time poor, menopause knowledge low in some cases. Blood tests and things that we often assume are the ways to find out what's going on and not always accurate or the way to go. So there's still a long way to go for women, particularly in regional areas, to get good support and understand what is going on. So I was burnt out. Long story short, I've been sort of navigating that for a good few years. And in my true sort of corporate high achiever spirit, just trying to push on. I was working with all men on an exec team and, just like the research, I didn't want to be the one saying, hey, I need to, have some water and have a lunch break here and give me that air conditioning remote control, for God's sake. So, I was trying to be that strong one. And, that further compounded because stress, workplace stress makes everything worse. Hot flushes worse, menopause symptoms worse. So in that way, I probably didn't help myself, but also, the medical support wasn't forthcoming either. So by the time I did figure out what was going on, I did speak to my boss, and I made some adjustments to my travel and, just little things in my schedule that helped me manage a little bit better. And just him knowing and having that sort of bit of empathy was really helpful. But by that point, I was, really, really depleted. And I got to the point where I said to my husband, you know what, we were out walking one day and I just kind of broke down and said, I just don't think I can do this anymore. And it wasn't great weather, and he thought I was talking about the walk. He's like, well, we can turn back now. And I was like, no, I mean, like, this is like life and what I'm trying to do, because I was the breadwinner. I was in the big job with 4 kids, and my health was really not good. And I said, I just don't think, I said, if I keep pushing on, I think the detriment to my health is going to be bigger. I didn't have a backup plan, to be honest, and I did resign from my job. And, whilst the Menopause Society say around 10% of women do that due to menopause symptoms, again, anecdotally, I would say it's probably a little bit higher. That's not going to be everyone's experience. Unfortunately, that was mine because I needed to focus on my health. And, I started my business, actually, a couple of businesses. I do some leadership coaching and consulting, and I was passionate. As soon as my health was back, and I'd been researching this for 6 years, in the end, 9 doctors and lots of amazing collaborations. I was just passionate that other women get the information they need sooner, that they don't get, sideswiped like I did. And that we make it okay to have, to talk about this and to learn from my mistakes as well, and just kind of really open this conversation both for women but also in the workplace. So so that's what I've done. I'm the crazy person talking about menopause on LinkedIn and questioning my sanity.
It's the crazy people who rule the world. Come on, you're making a change already. But thank you for sharing your story. There's one part of it I just want to stress before I ask you a bit about the women, what you've been learning working with women. So when you took that time off, how did you nurse yourself back to health? Because I'm sure there's some women who are probably identifying with the symptoms you're talking about right now. They may be thinking about taking the time off, but when you take the time off, what do you do to nurse yourself back to health?
So I had already started to create some positive changes for myself in my health. And this is a great topic we could, literally just spend a podcast on. And I kind of created it in the true sense of, someone who's done a bit of OD work and whatever. I actually created a model for myself. And I really I actually use that now in the coaching I do. But it really was just kind of stepping back and saying, okay, the first step I always say is like, let's connect the dots. Like, let's truly understand what's going on. And sometimes for women, and I was there as well, to stand back and kind of say, it's not all menopause, right? But there's certainly a lot there. But I call it Menopausal. It's just like this midlife, there's a lot going on. Like there's aging parents, I had stuff going on with my kids. And then I had to figure out, how we're going to get income into that. There's all this stuff going on. So you sort of want to look at it and go, wow, that's a lot. Like Brene Brown calls it the midlife unraveling for a reason. Like it's sort of this heavy responsibility time. And then in addition, how do we connect the dots on what's going on actually in our bodies? So by that stage, I had good support. I had a plan, and I really focused on my, physical and emotional health. So a first step, connecting the dots. The second step is really supporting your physical body and understanding how menopause impacts your body and how it changes, and being, taking out a healthy ownership of managing that, not just thinking you can kind of ignore it, not just thinking you can push through it, but actually figuring out what is the right supportive plan for you. So it's like that sort of self-compassionate action, like taking a healthy level of ownership, but receiving support, so that was important for me. And then the sort of the mental and emotional health. So if I look after myself physically, the basics matter. I was going to say, like, we're looking for the panacea. Yes, HRT is very effective for a lot of women, Some people like supplements. It's all great, right? But none of it is a silver bullet. The basics really matter, like drink your water, figure out how you can get better sleep. So deal with the night sweats or whatever it is that's waking you up. The hormonal changes, like that, they lead to that middle of the night worrying. Like even just knowing that actually hormones are playing a role in you being awake at 2:14 a.m. worrying about everything. So having a plan around how you're going to support yourself, not with self-judgment and not trying to change everything. So exercise. I'm a big believer. My undergrad was in science and physical education, so I'm a mover, and I had to change how I was moving because my exercise at times was feast or famine. It was nothing, or it was too intense. And here I was running half marathons, and that was just depleting me further. So I've learned a lot about how to support the midlife body, but it's little changes. It's those 1 degree shifts. And it's that boring consistency. So it's a time to reevaluate your habits. It's a time to reevaluate, how things are going at work and what you can let go of and who can support you. So I was on the path. Then I took the time off and set up my business. And by that stage, I really started to then get some momentum around, supporting my health. But it's not one and done, and it's not perfect. And even though I'm now, 4 years postmenopausal, 4+ years, I still have times where symptoms pop up, where I struggle physically and emotionally, but I kind of know what's going on and what I can do about it. So it's an ongoing journey, right? It's menopause, like I say, it's certainly not the end for women because, they're often at the peak of their career. There's no way it's the end. But it is also something that does continue, and that's why at the end of the day, I'm just a huge advocate. This is where the superpower bit comes in of like, if we can get good support and take ownership, we can actually seize some of the biological opportunities that menopause brings us in how it changes our brain and how the caring hormones go down, because it's just a little bit less about caring for everyone else and it's a little bit more about you. And that is a literal change that happens in the circuitry of your brain. So you understand these things, that cognition and memory, they're challenged for a while. It's scary. You're a corporate woman and you can't remember the word you were saying and everyone's looking at you in that meeting. Wow. And then, of course, cue a hot flush, so, but if you know what's going on and then you have a plan around it, you can actually get through that time and seize the postmenopausal growth, which is massive. Like women, it's new things, new careers, new partners, new friends, they're more direct, they're more honest. There's a sense of coming into a healthy power post-menopause and just giving a few less Fs about everyone else and just being a little bit more about yourself finally. And we need those women in the workplace, don't we?
I love it. And I like what you're saying, especially when you talk about some of the ways to care for ourselves. And yes, there are times when we're so busy in either our own workplaces or we run businesses and we're extremely busy and we're taking care of everybody else, taking care of our customers, our clients. And somehow this season or this transition forces us to take a moment to think about ourselves and what we need to do, what's going on around you. How do you regulate that and get in the support that you need? Now, one thing you mentioned was how at some point you had a conversation with your own boss and all that. For women who are at work, are feeling these symptoms, how should they approach the conversation without necessarily feeling embarrassed about it or hiding it for too long, especially when it's becoming a bit more detrimental either to work or to their health? What can they do and what can they say?
Yeah, I think it's a very, it's obviously a sensitive topic, right? So I think it's going to be very individual and depending on trust and psychological safety. So my view on that is let's first support the women who are in the workplace, who are navigating this, so they can get the support they need and we make it easier for them to look after themselves. Now, if they want to, I always say, like, let's not do menopause show and tell at work. Like, when you're in the depth of that struggle, and here I was in an influential role, was I rolling out a workplace menopause program? No, because I was like, really struggling myself. So I told my boss, but it was kind of like out of necessity. I don't necessarily go and preach that everyone should be having, and I get asked it a lot, like, how do we have menopause conversations at work? And I think it's great, but I think it's great for managers and colleagues and women to understand more about this and become informed and come from that foundation and know it's not forever. It can impact a woman's, productivity and certainly confidence. And so in the spirit of things like, Are You Okay Day, it's kind of more that, I just encourage managers, like as I'm sure you would, like have regular check-ins anyway. And if you really think someone's not, doing okay, ask, how they're doing, but know that a lot of women are not going to be comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And the research shows this because of the fear of negative stereotypes and not being seen to be coping or even discrimination. So my belief is, and I think back, if I'd seen something, if I'd been exposed to something in the workplace, and we have an e-learning program for workplaces so that women, they can get in there and get the resources and get the info, so can managers and colleagues. But we don't have to be necessarily in a workshop or a big discussion. We make it easier for her to get the information she needs, which I believe is truly that inclusive action, right? Because then she's going to be able to get the support she needs, have the conversation if she wants to, use the resources, but take an ownership of her menopause experience. And if that's a better experience for her and her symptoms are reduced or relieved, then she is going to stay and thrive in that organisation. So hence where this is really about. It's a talent, it's about talent, it's about inclusion, it's about retaining these women. And yes, utopia is we might have open conversations in the workplace. In the UK, it sounds like doing a lot of that. I just don't think we're there yet. This is a very new topic in Australia. And of course, my passion goes to let's help the women first and let's create that change, that social change through the women having more agency around this topic,
Right.
and their bodies.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I know that with the Meno Collective, I'm also going to check what is the impact of having that support network? Because you mentioned it, people are still getting into it. We're not yet that open about it, and sometimes it just feels uncomfortable having to share it with people you don't even know. So how does the Meno Collective help with that support system? Where can they go? What is it that they can do, and how can they reach you with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so look, we have group programs, and that creates that very safe container for women who then get direct access to really well qualified menopause practitioners and doctors and myself to be able to connect and ask questions, and they access self-paced resources as well. But it's so validating for women, and it's so powerful because it's a time to get a personalized plan for you, but it's a time to kind of realize that, like a lot of things as we come through in this midlife, is maybe we need to upgrade not only our lifestyle choices, but also like how are the communities that we're part of really serving us at this time. And I find that women don't need to know each other very well and be in a community where, everyone is experiencing similar challenges and growth opportunities to be able to be hugely supportive, to each other, which, it gives me hope. But I do think, if I'm really honest with you, a lot of women are like, oh, gosh, I don't know if I want to, be, even in that context, I think there's still a lot of fear. So, I just want to make it okay for women to take that ownership because it's going to pay off big time. And yeah, if anyone's interested, so I guide people to a perimenopause checklist and some tips that I've got, sort of like, how do I know if I'm there and what do I do next? And that's on our website. People just go to www.freemenoguide.com menopausal.com, and I can give you the link for that. But that's a good place to start for people, and then they can they'll get our blogs and things like that as well.
Right. Thank you for sharing. So we'll share that link also. You can check it for our viewers and listeners and go there and get the information and start from there. One more question for you as I think about this topic, and hopefully it will continue to gain ground. There'll be more research around it. When you look at the women you've talked with, can you share maybe one of the interesting stories you've seen about you mentioned that it's a transition, it's not the end of life, right? You can still thrive through it. You can, once you understand and you get the support that you need around it, there's a lot that we can still do because you've got many years to live. So do you have a story that could inspire some of our audience about maybe some of the people you've worked with, maybe a particular one that just stands out on how not knowing what it is into knowing what it is, getting the help and support, and then thriving through it? You've shared your story, so of course we can see you thriving because you're now leading the business and building it from there. I can imagine you probably wouldn't have thought you'd be doing this at some point. But see the journey is taking you on, right?
Thanks to menopause, right?
I love it. But is there, any other story to share with our audience?
Yeah, look, there's plenty. I mean, one that comes to mind that's got a workplace sort of angle on it is, one woman had her manager say, she was a very, very senior woman, and she had a manager said, "Hey, I just noticed you're not contributing in the meetings lately like you normally would. Like, what's going on?" Sort of getting a bit of feedback. And she had that moment where she was like, "Oh, am I on? Do I tell?" And she said, "Look, you know what? I actually couldn't remember what we discussed in the last meeting, and I think I'm suffering some symptoms of perimenopause." So that's a vulnerable moment. Now, that led to a cascade of actions in a very large organisation where they've put in place, all sorts of things like training and workplace champions. And so her being open, and this is what I often say, is like when women support themselves and they, take that ownership, then it can have that amazing ripple effect for others. I had another woman in our 8-week program who prides herself on her intellect. She does a very technical job, and she was really struggling with the symptoms of brain fog and forgetfulness, and she just felt like someone who'd been so concise, and had that great recall, and it just wasn't there. And in addition, she was beating herself up about that, right? And we know that our perceptions of menopause and aging, that internalized kind of, sort of ageism we can sometimes have, or our negative feelings about menopause actually make the experience worse. So she was it was causing her a lot of stress. And then she started to pull back from things at work and writing less and all of this sort of stuff. So it was really impacting her. So in our program, we helped her learn, what was going on, what she could do to support her cognition and her memory, but also then self-compassion. So it was kind of a combination of, some menopause actions and really learning to be more self-compassionate around this and letting her know that, it wasn't going to be like this forever. And she is now just like kicking goals in her career. And, she just, great feedback from her just around, what a game changer it is. But lots of stories, relationships, libido, brain fog comes up a lot.
Interesting. Thank you.
It doesn't happen overnight, but yeah, we tolerate stuff as women. Like we think that this is probably what it's supposed to be like. And sometimes it doesn't have to be quite that hard.
And like you said, it shows up differently for different people. The symptoms could be different. The way we interact could be different. The support we get could be different.
Yes.
So just leaning out, knowing that you're not alone, would be very helpful in this. So I'm just thinking, knowing what you know now, if you were speaking to the younger version of yourself at that time, what would you tell her? Like in maybe 2 or 3 bullets, what would you tell her?
Yeah, I think I would really caution her around the normalization of high levels of stress, and that just because you can do it, doesn't mean it's actually okay for your body. And, I would also encourage her to be in the striving in a corporate career to be more connected, inside and to what's going on in the body, not just, be so cerebral and head led. So I think stress is a big one. And I think that I had normalized high levels of stress, and I think many women do. Then we bring that into perimenopause, and then our body, it's like pouring gasoline on the symptoms. So, I think that's probably a big one. And look, self-compassion's been a huge journey for me as well. Like many women, I think I've always pushed myself quite hard and been hard on myself. And I've really learned over the last 6 years how to approach things differently. And it's an ongoing practice, but to truly be kinder to yourself is huge. And I know that sounds like a small thing, or like it's not a simple thing, but it's a really big one. And then I think there's something around, these are all connected, but I think there's something around sacrifice. I think a lot of women get used to trying to cover all the roles and often feeling like, I'm not really doing any of them well. And then I'll just I'll miss that workout, or I won't quite catch up with that friend because I've got to do something for the kids, or I've got to do something for work, or I've got to do, blah, blah, blah. So there's again a normalization of self-sacrifice that ultimately doesn't help anyone. And herein lies the opportunity to reevaluate some of these things and really embrace growth through midlife and menopause, because it's going to be all for the better. Doesn't mean it's easy, but there's a lot there for the taking, and a lot of it's really positive.
Wonderful. So I hear you talk about stress, identifying your level of stress, managing that. The other S I heard was self-care. We talk about it, but it's important that we actually practice that for ourselves as well. And then knowing that, there is so much support. That would be the third S. So if I pick 3 S's from today's conversation, there's the stress spot. There are, the symptoms that come with it, identifying and understanding those symptoms, knowing that support and help is available, and then practicing self-care. This has been an incredible time. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I want to say, Melissa Macgowan, she's available on LinkedIn. If the topic is something you want to delve into a lot more, please reach out to her. We want to make sure that, this advocacy and this word is being spread across in our communities, because that's only when we get the best out of it. It's not the time to be quiet. It's the time to reach out and find the support and help. Help is available. That was something we were talking about before we started recording this. Help is available, and many more than you think, many more women than you think are going through the same thing that you're going through. And that in itself is power, knowing that you're not alone in this. So I look forward to having another conversation with you. Thank you for joining us on the Flourishing 40s. And on behalf of the community, I want to say thank you, Melissa, for sharing your story and for being a light and a beacon to many women in the future and in the world. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks.
Bye.